The beans are ground, the steam is rising, and the mics are on.
I'm Ishita, joined as always by Alejandro. We take the topics you love and break them down over a fresh roast.
So grab your mug because it's showtime.
Welcome back to Espression. Today we are stepping into the heart of the digital couch to discuss the impact and ethics of AI in psychotherapy.
As these models become more human-like, they bring up a fascinating paradox. Can a tool that is programmed to be friendly and validating actually help us through the friction and discomfort that real growth often requires?
In this episode, we explore the sycophancy problem, the tendency for AI to agree with our biases, and the concept of cognitive offloading, where we might be outsourcing our emotional regulation to an algorithm.
We're bridging the gap between technical knobs and the human psyche to see how these tools are reshaping our mental landscapes.
Let's dial it in.
Welcome to episode 2 of our series AI in Therapy, the second series in Espression. Today we're going to talk about the impact and the ethics of AI in the domain of psychotherapy. So far we have talked a little bit about what the impact of AI can look like, but we want to talk a little bit more about impacting people, impacting communities, and eventually take a step into the future of both areas. So AI on the tech side on one hand, and on the other, the psychotherapy community and all that, and how that might be eventually affected. So there is one concept here that gets thrown around a bit, the idea of cognitive offloading, which is this offloading our cognitive tasks to the AI models. Not just memory, but the process of doing something, the process of thinking. So these models have gotten really good at simulating what or how a person thinks. And in so many other domains, it's being used to think, quote unquote, think. And in the case of psychotherapy, there is one more layer to it, and it's emotional regulation. So how do you see this, Ishita, being used currently and in the future? The idea of people outsourcing their skills and their thinking, but also their emotions.
I think there's two sides of it, and I don't know if I side with one of them more than the other, but there's definitely this concept of outsourcing your thinking processes to AI and letting it make decisions for you when a person is in distress. Now that can be helpful. I mean, I don't see why that would be wrong in some situations. But then there's also the risk of just losing that ability to navigate through problems by yourself. And then I think in the long run, is that good? Or is that something that's gonna limit you in certain ways? But the way I think about it is that even with different developments in technology that have come about, we do view them negatively at first, but in the long run, is it not making our lives easier? Is it not maybe, instead of slowing us down sort of, maybe it's just making us do things faster because everything's at our fingertips, we can solve problems quickly. So like I said, there's two sides to it, and one is that you get your solutions given to you really quickly, you get through your problems, and the other is that, well, you kind of get used to using that AI tool constantly and not really thinking for yourself, and does that then become a habit? So yeah, I mean, there's two sides to it, and we can discuss about that. What do you think? What do you think would be an ideal scenario?
It's kind of a complicated question because the concept of cognitive offloading in this area, there was an article a couple of months ago that talked about this concept, but related to GPS and these the map apps, so Google Maps, Apple Maps, Waze, all of this, and how people have what the article was trying to prove was that these apps have made us or have affected our spatial intelligence and our ability to navigate the world, like spatial wise. So the fear is that the AI models, the LLMs, and all of these tools will eventually affect other areas that we're still not aware. And they might be doing it even with us. Like, we get the immediate benefit, like for example, with the GPS app, that we input where we want to go, and the app gives us a step-by-step process on how to get there. So there's two sides to this. I really do think that if the tool is helping us get faster to our destination, like with the GPS app, it's quite literal because we're actually going somewhere. With an AI tool for therapy, I think it's eventually okay because we can then focus our energy into something else, something that's more enriching and valuable, I think. But again, like, it just seems like one of these things where we don't really know if I know, I like, this is my opinion today, but then once we know more about the effects, this can also change because we still don't have enough information. With the use of these models as well, there's still this fear that the models might influence people into doing things that they might not, they might influence people into doing things without those people being aware. And we've seen this news of people who've been, even, again, we talked about this last episode, people who've been pushed to even do really, really strong and powerful things like taking their own lives. But at a more general level, there's also this fear that maybe the AI sort of influences people's thinking. That's actually a really good question. Like, from a psychotherapy perspective, how much influence does the therapist have or should have? How neutral should they be? And how do you think this could be affected if people start using AI models as therapists?
That's an interesting one. I mean, with human therapists, what you get is a person who has biases, but they are trained to not use their biases and to look at situations more neutrally and help you through them. With AI, the problem is that most of the times, these models are designed to take your side and tell you that everything that you're doing is correct, or maybe validate things that are maybe not that helpful for you. And it sounds weird that an AI therapist or like an AI therapy tool is not going to be as biased because it's not going to be as neutral because it's going to sort of take your side and say that, oh, I completely understand this and that. Anyone in this situation would, feel this way. And it sometimes reinforces unhealthy behavior as well. But a human who actually has biases will be able to look through these biases and challenge the person who's coming to them with any kind of issue and make them look at different perspectives. And that is very important in therapy. It's very important for the therapist to remain neutral and not get super involved in the client's storylines. They are still someone who's coming to you with their life stories, their traumas, things they want to talk about, things they want to improve, but the therapist needs to look at it from a different perspective, work on it, and make sure that the client is able to get out of it in a way that's healthy and a way that makes them function in life in a healthy way. What I see with AI is that, like I said, for some problems, for some situations, it might be okay because if you want a simple solution for a simple problem, go for it. But if anything with layers, with a lot of human experience, trauma, anything like that, something more complicated, AI might simplify it too much for that person. And we don't know how much of a difference that's making in that person's life. If it could be making them feel better temporarily, but is it something that's giving them the actual tools necessary to navigate situations in life? We're not sure about that.
I mentioned this last episode as well about one of the OpenAI models, 4.0 specifically, which a couple of months ago there was a whole controversy because they tweaked some knobs in the algorithm, and the model started exhibiting this sycophantic behavior where it tried really hard to earn people's trust by always telling them that what they were saying was the most amazing thing in the world. And people started, eventually it came out that yeah, those tweaks made the model behave in weird ways that just to seek that validation from the user. Well, I mean, I guess it kind of goes both ways because the user also gets validated, but then the model. So ideally, like, what these models have been increasingly tweaked to be like is this sort of, like, I get the whole point. The whole point is to make them more accessible. The whole point is to make them more human. But they're sacrificing sometimes the accuracy of their answers. And with therapy, like we talked about this as well last time, but therapy is uncomfortable sometimes, isn't it? Like, it's supposed to be that friction that helps you see things in a different light, see even things that you might not be aware. And one of the big questions that we have right now is how to make a model that manages to challenge people and challenge those inputs. And there's also the huge elephant in the room of the attachment question. So what happens if or when, and like even it's probably happening right now, definitely, people being attached to these models. It actually happens with 4.0. So when 4.0 is a model by OpenAI and ChatGPT, when they discontinued 4.0, there's still this huge community today who is mad about OpenAI discontinuing 4.0 because 4.0 was a very quote-unquote empathetic but really sycophantic model that told people what they wanted. So there's this other question of, like, do people, like, is there some people who would just be happy listening to what they want to hear? But how do you see this paradox of, on one hand we have convenience of having the answer that we want now, but then we also need that friction, don't we?
Yeah, it definitely, what comes to my head right now is the fact that the stories that we tell AI, it's how we are interpreting these things, how we think about these things, that okay, I went through this experience, this is how it made me feel, this is what was happening, I think that the persons involved in this situation did this because they probably felt like that. All of those things that you tell AI, that's going to be the story that you tell AI, and then AI is going to interpret it according to these algorithms, and then every solution that you get to your problem would be based on that. Now, when you speak to a human therapist, an actual therapist, I would say, that is different, because not only are they listening to what you're saying, but they're also reading between the lines. They're also thinking, is that really what happened, or is that your interpretation of what happened? Did that person really say something to you that was, harmful, or was it something that you interpreted because of your own traumas and beliefs and all these things that you hold in your mind, these themes that are running in your mind? So it's also about the fact that these solutions that the AI is providing you with, how accurate are they? Because they might not even know the whole story. Like, the AI models might not know the whole story, and no one is, there are a lot of people who are extremely self-aware, but no one is going to be super self-aware when it comes to dealing with heavy stuff and dealing with things that they need to work through in therapy, where you're going to just be able to spot all of your biases, all of the things that you're suppressing, anything that you are believing very strongly, which might be coming from a certain experience you've had or things that you've grown up with. So that is something that also affects the solutions that you're getting. And then on top of that, when you share these things with AI and it gives you these sort of flowery answers where it's like, yes, like that is really hard and that can really be stressful, all of that, which is fine. Like, yes, things are stressful. A lot of times it's also comforting to hear this AI tell you that, yes, my experience is valid and I did go through something and it was hard, which is good. But it also sort of gives you an illusion that there's a person telling you this. And what we also see, and this is something that has come up in research as well, is that people have started sort of disliking human companions because they don't always validate your problems or the way you say things like AI does. AI always starts with a validation. It will always start with a compliment and an exclamation mark. And humans don't often do that. Sometimes humans would challenge it, sometimes they would not react as strongly to it. It's all different. And that is actually something that has come up in research where people have started viewing AI as this idealized companion. But that's not, it's not a real person. It's it's an algorithm that's answering to you.
It's part of the wider problem of these, because it's not just LLMs. So LLMs are generative AI, they generate text, but it's also the other side of AI that is about tailoring what you get to you. And there's a book called The Anxious Generation, which talks a little bit about this shift between happened in the past decade and how we have been bombarded with algorithms that are trained to give us what we want when we want it. And that includes, of course, like in addition to all these algorithms, there's also social media, and how social media is, or the reward that it gives people is validation. So it's sort of it creates this validation economy where there's this whole generation growing up with tailored AI algorithms, a validation economy, and on top of that, you have the AI LLM generative models used for emotional reasons. So then it adds one more cog in the validation machine in the whole let's give people what they want. The consequence of that is that we have people who are trained to get what they want when they want it. And so if therapy is supposed to be friction, then yeah, like it makes sense. They're not going to like it. But it's the whole point, isn't it? Like sometimes we need to hear those things, even if we don't want to hear them, because it's what makes us grow. And we become trapped in these bubbles. And it's like, for example, the bubbles that we see in social media, where people think they become completely biased with one viewpoint because it's what they see, but it isn't actually the entire picture. So that makes complete sense what you're saying.
But do you think there is an existing AI tool out there or something that could be developed that could actually sort of mirror what actually happens in psychotherapy, that friction, that questioning and challenging and making you sit with your, uncomfortable emotions? Do you think that is something that can be done in AI or is being done already in some way?
I think it can be done because, again, as I said in the previous episode, I think it's an engineering problem of training the model to sort of think, quote unquote, again, every time I say think, and I think with LLM models, it's every time I say think with LLMs, they're not really thinking, but quote unquote think like a therapist, and also to challenge people. The challenge, I think, is to get people to actually use something like that, because again, like there's this whole societal issue of people want validation and people want quick answers, and they increasingly don't want to think. We all increasingly we want a solution now, and it can sometimes be a good thing, but if it's used in these really critical domains where it can affect a person's emotions, I think it needs to be handled with care. But I do think it is possible, and I think but I think it requires people to accept that they might not always get the answer that they're thinking about. And I think increasingly that's going to be the wider problem, is we need to learn to accept truths that we sometimes don't want to hear. I also think you probably know more about this. And it's also a question on my part, but is that a reason why people might also be afraid to go to therapy? Because they're afraid of them being told things that they don't want to hear?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's so many instances where even I personally have thought I should just get an AI to solve this problem for me, just give me some steps so I don't have to deal with a certain thing. Of course, that's something that I don't do actively every single time, but there are moments when you're too overwhelmed and sometimes you give in and you do stuff like that. But I think it's definitely like, it's the accessibility of it, the fact that it's right at your fingertips. It's much cheaper than getting an actual therapist. And then you get these quick fixes to your problems, which do not work in therapy, because the whole point of therapy is to work through your problems and to make sure that they don't affect you the way that they do now, and you maybe can develop a healthier relationship with things that trigger you right now. So those kinds of things, I mean, it is definitely quite difficult to sit with that. It's uncomfortable, and not everyone likes it, and not everyone wants to willingly go through those experiences. And that's why the first thing in therapy is that you can't make someone go to therapy. That person has to consent to going to therapy by themselves. Like, they have to make that choice. But what we also see is that because there's this illusion that this AI therapist is sort of like this person's kind of best friend and just validating everything and giving them solutions and helping them through problems, it also has definitely, I think it can create an unhealthy relationship with that tool, because you will not always get those answers from, first of all, people around you, and secondly, also there's been research done on this, that people have been affected by software updates, because it changes the tone of the AI tool and the way that it's reacting.
4.0.
Yeah, and it's something that just shocks people, because they're so used to hearing the same kind of responses again and again, and that's what they're used to, and they don't want to feel uncomfortable by anything. They don't want to feel challenged. That's where I think it starts to get a bit problematic, because what you are looking for is not really a companion, but this mirror sort of, or some kind of, like, I don't even know what the term is for it, like, but some kind of thing that's always agreeing with you and never challenging you. And I think
Exactly.
that's not how things work.
Sycophantic is the word that's used there. Like, it's this idea of people or something trying really, really hard to give you what you want so that you like it in return. And the perfect example of what you said, this grief, is OpenAI's 4.0. So 4.0 was a model that was the free model used in ChatGPT for quite a while, quite a couple of months. So 4.0 became this easily accessible model that was the default choice for everyone using the free version of ChatGPT. And 4.0 was the model that I mentioned earlier, the one who was tweaked to be quote unquote friendlier, but then people realized that it was just completely agreeing with the wildest of inputs. And then OpenAI even acknowledged it, and they said, okay, we're going to go back to the previous version. We're going to make it be a little bit more rational, because we tweaked it too much. But as the models kept evolving, as OpenAI kept adding more safeguards and sort of accounting for that sycophantic behavior, people started to miss 4.0. And there's still today a community of people that access 4.0 via the API. So because they discontinued it in ChatGPT, and so they use the underlying OpenAI API to access 4.0, because to them that is the best model, mostly, I would argue, because of that behavior, because it's giving them what they want. And again, another piece of important context here is there's this subreddit called Therapy GPT. So it's a subreddit of people who use LLMs as therapists, and it has almost 24,000 weekly visitors. So there are definitely a lot of people online, and there's a community that centers around using GPT in this case, but I mean, it applies to any model as therapists. So
I mean, there's a lot of different views going around, and one good thing is that there is more research coming up. There's, like, we've quoted some research already, in the mental health field and the field of AI. I think there's lots of developments going on simultaneously, and the only thing to take away would be that view everything with a grain of salt. Just try to be more aware and critical of things around you, and these kinds of conversations and research is definitely going to lead to better, more efficient solutions in the future. That being said, shall we move into our break segment now?
Perfect. We will be right back with Espression.
Welcome to our break segment. This one is called Tech Tip. It's one where our tech specialist, Alejandro,
Quote tech specialist, but okay,
will give us some insight into what we can do with tech and how we can use it more smartly. So, Alejandro, take it away.
Okay, so for this episode's tech tip, we're talking about AI. In general, it's just a tip that applies to anything when using an AI tool, especially a generative LLM. And it's don't stick to their first answer. So as Ishita said, be critical, question, don't be afraid to question it in even the smallest of details, because remember, these tools can make mistakes. The warning label that these companies put in these ChatGPT or Claude that says, remember, AI can make mistakes. It's there because it actually can and will make a lot of mistakes. So use your creativity to challenge and spot patterns or biases that sometimes you or the model have. Think of it as a sparring partner for thoughts, something to question and not to obey. So don't be afraid to question. That's a tip in life, and especially when using AI models.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. I mean, I think one thing that we do with AI is go for the easier bit, go for the thing that's making us think the least. But this is something very interesting that you've shared, because our automatic response is to be like, well, AI said I could do it, so yeah, I'm gonna do it.
And I'll add one more thing here. Part personal opinion, part something that's being said in the research, but this critical thinking bit is what's going to make the difference between people who adapt to this post-AI future versus people who are stuck just doing the same thing that they've been doing. So people who criticize, people who think for themselves, people who are creative will definitely have a huge advantage going forward. So if you work that muscle, then you don't really have to be afraid of AI, because it will never replace that critical thinking part, that direction mindset. This is what I keep telling people. Just think that you are the conductor of an orchestra and you have all of these tools, and don't just be someone who plays, be the whole conductor. Like, control the entire situation. This is what's going to make the difference moving forward.
That's a really great analogy. I think that really puts it into perspective that these tools are actually here to help us, and technology in general. I mean, we don't have to become sort of dependent on it, or we don't have to give in to them, sort of. We still have power. It is our brilliant minds that have actually created these as well, so we can work with them, and we can work with them in a healthy way.
Exactly.
That was great. Thank you so much, Alejandro, for sharing that with us.
You are very welcome. Shall we go into the next bit?
Yes, let's go. So, as we go into this next segment, I think it's really important to think about the impact of the new developments in AI and mental health, not just on the people who are using it, but also on the people behind the screens, people working on these things, people who belong to the mental health industry and the AI industry as well. In terms of the mental health industry, the conversation recently is that people are kind of viewing human therapy as something that would in the future be more of a luxury, and while AI therapy would be the default, which, I mean, AI is quite accessible. It is, as long as you have an internet connection, you can use it, and therapy is expensive, that's true. So what it essentially does at this point is that it creates this divide in our heads that someone who is accessing therapy from an actual human therapist is going for something luxurious, but AI would be the default. And there are lots of concerns that come with that because, like we've talked about, the human therapy side of it has lots of things that are research-based, that have come from experience. Humans are able to reflect and challenge and read between the lines and all the things that we talked about. That does create a lot of concern because if more and more people go towards AI, we don't know what that would mean for the overall mental health quality of people.
I think it's really likely that will happen because, and it goes back to something, I believe we touched on it before. Therapy right now can sometimes also feel like a luxury to some people. And also the anonymity of it. The idea of just you have this chatbot that you can talk, you can just flood it with your thoughts here and now, and you don't have to go through the hassle of making an appointment and going to the actual place where the therapist is. So I think it can go, it will definitely help with the accessibility question. But definitely it will create a divide because that luxury of having the time, and I think increasingly, there's also an article a couple of weeks ago about how now it's more of a status symbol to take an entire morning to go to the gym and to eat healthy than it is a status symbol to own a fancy designer bag. So yes, in the future, status symbol can be, I have a therapist who's a human and not just an LLM. Now, on that note, there's also a question from my side. As someone who works in this field, what do you think about therapists using AI to assess people or to help to help organize their thoughts and their cases and their notes? Like, do you think that is a good thing, or do you think that there's some dangers to it?
Personally, I do not like that. I don't think that that is something that should be done, because when a therapist sits with a client, like I've mentioned before as well, it's not just the words that they're saying, but there's a lot more than that. You look at the body language, what they're communicating with their expressions, the tone of their voice, what something they say means in the context of their entire life experience. Now, that is something that requires not just listening and noting down things, but also constantly reflecting and thinking critically about things. I think this belief that, it's just a bunch of note taking that psychologists do, and then you just look at it and you see like the symptoms and stuff, and that's how you have a diagnosis or something, or you see like what next steps. I think it's not as mechanical as that, and that's the whole beauty of the mental health field. The fact that there's so much reflection going on, there's so much looking beyond your words, beyond what you are saying, and actually thinking about these things. So for assessments and note taking and all these things, I mean, your notes aren't just going to be something that the client is saying, it's also going to be your own thoughts of what you think in the context of everything else. So definitely AI cannot do that unless there is a specific AI tool that is built for psychological reflection and, taking these notes and stuff. But then again, I'm not sure how that would work. Being from a mental health background, that is also scary. And I think that is something that even a lot of professionals are thinking about now. When you think about, okay, these AI tools are gonna sort of start doing these things. First, there was this fear of, oh my God, is AI gonna take over and are we gonna lose our jobs? But I think the bigger fear is, are people, because these tools are so accessible, are people automatically going to be attracted to these tools and not go for the actual research-backed, trained, this research-backed therapies that trained professionals are giving to them? And, maybe in the end go for something which could turn out to be potentially harmful for them. I think that is something that is definitely worrying to me and to a lot more mental health professionals out there. And in that case, I mean, it's quite important to make sure that the human element sort of is still very much there.
Yeah, because see, in a lot of domains, what we keep seeing is that the advice is to start thinking like you're a supervisor, like you're someone who just gets a whole bunch of interns and you have to explain with detail what you want them to do. But I think with this topic in particular, this piece of advice starts to fail. And as someone who really does believe in the promise of AI, but also someone who cares deeply about people and about their emotions and about actually understanding what goes behind a person's face, about what they do, I think it's really dangerous to think of a therapist as someone who just manages points of data and forgets about the human aspect of it. Because I think while it could work, and I would imagine I can see it working, I can see it definitely, and especially in an economy of scale, it will definitely be more efficient to have one person supervising a lot of people who are, who have an AI therapist. But then the human is just the one who analyzes the 0.01% of people who are deemed to be high risk or urgent care, kind of, that trigger a safety warning, which, and this is also another important piece of context that could help this. So according to OpenAI, the conversations in ChatGPT that trigger their psychological safety warnings are really rare. Only 0.07 of weekly users and 0.01 of messages. So this is what I mean by 0.01. Like, it's statistically the people who, at least OpenAI, which, I mean, again, might not have the best track record in terms of safety, but according to them, it's still a really, really low number. So it completely dehumanizes that aspect, and I think we have to be really careful with how much power we give to the models. And we should not definitely think as therapists as just data managers, because we forget about this very, very important thing that you said last episode, which was humans. The most important thing that a therapist has or should have is empathy towards the human on the other side of the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, if you think of the psychologist in the setting as this supervisor who is managing all these AI tools and trying to get sort of their work done by these AI models, it definitely takes away from the whole reason as well why psychologists are in the field that they are. And also, I mean, I personally don't think that therapy can be simplified to that extent where it's a bunch of people going through this system of AI models and then only being assessed by, say, an actual therapist if they are high risk. And another thing so the research that you quoted, the statistics that you quoted, another important thing to think about here is you said that there's a very small percentage of
high risk
conversations that trigger, the psychological safety warnings. Now, what is that because AI is handling it well, sort of, and they're actually doing a good job of giving good advice and reflecting and all that? Or is it because the safety warnings or the regulations sort of are not that strong yet? Maybe they're not detecting enough high risk cases in a way.
Yeah, I think they're definitely...
That is also something that...
They're definitely masking some cases. And that's part of the controversy, is that even with all these safety nets, there's still a lot of cases that get through. So, yeah, I do think that, for example, as I said, and I added a disclaimer, OpenAI is definitely not the best one in terms of record of safety. And the question that you bring up is actually very interesting. Now, I think it will be hard to assess whether or not an advice given by the LLM is good enough that it soothes people into triggering the alarm by saying something that might be deemed as high risk. That's definitely a really interesting angle that I don't think has been explored. So if anyone wants to research that, that's definitely out there, because it definitely can. It would be hard to actually gauge, but it would be a really good indicator that things might improve in the future. Because what if, as you said, like even in the community, there's some people who are very for using AI as therapists because you get practical results of just people feeling better sometimes. And that's a bright outlook, I think. I think we should also focus on, okay, don't just talk negatively about these things, but how can we make them better? How can we train them to, quote unquote, think like a therapist and actually help us? Mm-hmm. Even though people will eventually, or should have always know that a lot of what the systems say are just that systems. They're a simulation of feelings, but they aren't actual feelings. But hey, sometimes that can be enough to help someone in a moment of crisis. Don't you think?
Yeah, like I said, there are moments when we all, I feel like, at this point have used AI. Because when it gets so overwhelming and you just need some solution, you go type out your problems and it helps get out of some problems. The only thing with that is that we still don't know if the long-term effects of that are good, if it's something that should keep going on, if you should go to AI for every single problem you have, if that dependency that you have with that AI model, if it's healthy or not. And I think this whole conversation that also brings us to all the ethics involved in using AI as this companion or this mental health tool, where the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that it is a simulation of a connection or empathy. It is something that it's not an actual person saying, I feel you and I know what you're going through and I'm sorry that you're going through that. It's an AI telling you that, saying these words to you, I'm sorry you're feeling that way, but it's not actually feeling anything. It might produce the same effect on you where it makes you feel good, but ethically speaking, is that something that's okay? Is that something that, yes, like, okay, if a person feels, say, less lonely by talking to an AI, in reality, unfortunately, they still don't have anyone to talk to because It's not a real person. It's not a person they're talking to. And in that case, I mean, again, I think there's two sides to it. There's also, you see, like, maybe there's an advantage to it. Maybe even if it's simulated, as long as it's helping that person, what's wrong with it? But then there's also this whole question of, but it's not real. What do you think about that? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think this idea of, okay, it's not real, but it's good enough, or it's not completely... I mean, real is kind of a hard word to use here because it actually gets results that are practically useful. It happens with programming where it delivers what people need, the app or the functionality that you need in your code, and it's good enough. Like, we just care about the practical results. Now, that mindset is dangerous when it comes to people, I think, because you're simplifying it, I think, too much. And as you said, like, if you simplify a therapist into just managing cases, but not really empathizing, not really, as you said, with the notes, like reflecting, analyzing, really caring about helping people, which I think everyone who's in health should have that as their main driving force. It's the same way that I think a teacher should also, people who study to become teachers should have that drive to really make their students understand and learn, and not just repeat what has been said for years. So, I mean, of course, it goes, this is what makes a good therapist or a bad therapist, just as it's what makes a good doctor and a bad doctor. I think it's dangerous to simplify it that much. And as someone who is, again, like, I really do think that AI will transform and will make us more efficient and will help us discover things that we haven't even thought of. I think it's really dangerous. But I do think there can be a balance. Like, there can definitely be okay, I'm just gonna talk to this LLM for a bit about the situation, because it's again, as I said in Detective, like a sparring partner for my thoughts. So, like, let's just assume that the LLM is trained to question, to criticize, to also give me angles that I wouldn't otherwise see, but it's giving them to me right here, right now. But then what if it's also combined with a human who also cares and empathizes and understands? So I don't know, like, do you think this hybrid method of psychotherapy could also work? Like, it's this idea of merging the best bits of each one. Do you think that it's more positive future than just sticking to one and just never really looking at what's on the other side?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting take, because I think you can't really pick either or in this time. I think when you've got all these AI tools which are much more accessible, which are giving you sort of instant answers, but then you also still don't have enough research to be sure if all these answers that they're giving is completely, like, you know, foolproof and you can completely trust them. I think a hybrid approach in this scenario is actually something that does sound like that might be it, because, like you said, like you put it very well, it's like getting the best out of both the things and trying to combine it together. And that way, I think we can work through a lot of the cons of both kinds of, I wouldn't say therapy, but both kinds of mental health support, whether it's AI or it's psychotherapy from a human being. While we do believe AI when it tells us stuff, especially if you're in a vulnerable place and you hear something comforting, even if it's from AI, you will believe it. But AI does also come with a disclaimer, like you said, AI will make mistakes, and also that AI will be like, I'm not a doctor, please consult an actual doctor. What that does is that you want to believe it so much, but you also are thinking, okay, but this is not an actual doctor. And it's really like living in that doubt itself. I don't see how that can be healthy. Like, you know, when you Google up symptoms of a problem, you're like, okay, I have an idea of what's going on, but you still have to go to a doctor and get it checked out. And until you get that checked out, you can't really be like sure that this is what's happening to me. And it's still, someone has to look at whatever it is. In that way, I mean, there's still, with AI as well, there's that warning that comes with it, which does create a little bit of discomfort in users, I think, in terms of trusting it. And in this scenario, then go consult an actual therapist and use the best of both, I would say.
But do you think that it can be enough for those light situations, in the way that maybe, I mean, if you, again, always consult an actual doctor, but you kind of have some idea of what to do if you have a cold, right? So it's a light situation, it's a sickness, but it's a common thing. And people eventually become so used to just, I know what to do, I kind of know what to take because I have allergies, because I have a headache, because I have this and this and this. I mean, I always consult an actual doctor, but we all have those little shortcuts. So do you think that for the lighter emotional loads, an AI system could be enough?
I think so, yeah. I think...
Or is there no such thing as a light emotional load?
Well, it depends. I mean, it always depends on the context, the situation. I mean, it's not just about what you're feeling, but also like what's making you feel that, and then how often you're feeling that, all sorts of things. But I would say that for one-off events where you feel a little discomforted, I think using AI would not be a bad thing. Like you said, like, you know what to do in a cold, or you could just Google up and be like, okay, I have a cold, what can I do? And you get those solutions, and you don't necessarily need to go to a doctor and get yourself checked out for that, and it usually goes away in a couple of days. But with physical health problems, even with mental health problems, what's important is to reflect on how often are you going for these small problems to AI. These small problems are small if they're one-off. Say you've had a bad experience, you've had a bad reaction to it, that's completely fine, that happens, it's life. You seek advice through an AI tool because that's what's most convenient for you in that moment, understandable. But is it regular that it's happening? Is it something that's happening every few days, every few weeks? Something that you see it's a pattern and something that's triggering you consistently, then that is something that needs to be worked through. Then the problem is bigger than the problem you're telling AI. And that's when you need to be a little bit more critical of your own problems, your own self, and think what you need to do. It's the same way if you get a cold, okay, that's fine. Take some medicines, drink some soup, you'll be fine. But if you're getting a cold every single month, is there something else going on? Like, why are you getting a cold every single month? That's not normal. So you go to a doctor and you talk about it. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind when you look at that. But that being said, I mean, AI definitely can be helpful in some situations, but it's very, very important to have that judgment, to have that insight, to see, what is good for you in the long run, what is good for you right now, what's healthy, and recognizing when you might actually need support from a professional.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy and a really good point you bring up. I think eventually, as AI systems become more of our everyday assistants, they might even be able to flag some of those patterns as to, you've talked a little too much about the situation. Are you sure that it's really not that big of a deal? Maybe you should consult with a professional. Looking forward, no one has really cracked the code to this assistant, this AI assistant that's always with you, but it might also be a really good way of also potentially flagging a lot of cases. And it might actually end up being good for psychotherapists in the long run in terms of jobs and workloads. So, but yeah. Anyways, this was a really nice continuation of the topic AI and therapy. So for the next episode, hopefully, we will talk a little bit more about the future of AI and therapy and AI and therapy. And hopefully have a little bit of a closer, give some tips moving forward. What we know, what we don't know, what we could know. And do you have anything else, Ishita? Do you want to say bye?
No, I think that's good enough. And we'll see you in the next episode.
To top off today's conversation, we've reached the crema, the final distillation of our look into the future of emotional sport.
We explored the tension between on-demand validation and the psychological friction that drives long-term change. We noted that while AI offers a unique, accessible sparring partner for our thoughts, it operates with a different ethical and emotional framework than a human therapist.
Our discussion highlighted the emergent reality of a hybrid world, one where we must balance the convenience of a digital mirror with the deep, unsimulated empathy of a shared human experience.
Both AI and human therapy provide different lenses through which we can view ourselves, each offering distinct tools for the journey toward mental clarity.
As you head out, reflect on the roles your digital tools play. Are they helping you see clearly or simply echoing what you want to hear?
Keep your curiosity sharp and your self-awareness even sharper.